Welcome to Dire Straits. I'm Amanda Monty.
I'm Tracy Clark-Flory.
Today we're doing an epic survey of divorce plots. All the books, films, television shows, and cultural changes that shaped our own relationships with the concept of divorce, and that taught us about family, love, and of course, heterosexuality. From ex-wives getting a new lease on life after their husbands dumped them for younger women, to the idea that kids suffer when adults separate. We'll also do a historical sweep of American attitudes toward divorce, from those held by the founding fathers to those that bubbled up after the sexual revolution when no-fault divorce was introduced in the U.S.
And of course, we'll look at where divorce plots stand today in the midst of unprecedented authoritarianism, gender division, feminist backlash, and an increasing number of straight women choosing to remain single.
So before we really dig into the pop culture that you and I grew up with, Tracy, and the divorce stories we're seeing today in media and entertainment, I want to start with a quick and dirty history of divorce narratives in America, a country that, to be clear, has from its earliest colonial days been organized by racial and gender hierarchies. What?
I'm just ever since you said quick and dirty, I've just
You can't.
I'm just and I felt
You
myself
can't
smiling,
hold
and
it
I'm
in.
like, oh no, she's gonna look up and see me smiling. I'm sorry.
Super
I'm so
dirty.
sorry. I'm sorry.
It's dirty, but not in that way. Like,
No,
in a
it's
gross
not.
way.
It's totally gross. It's not a good dirty. Okay, sorry. I will stop. You can return.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, we're off to a great start. So I've been doing a lot of research on white patriarchy in early America for a new project that I'm working on. Even looking at men's wills and early divorce cases, which are fascinating. And one thing that these documents really sort of drive home is how much the cultural and political order at the time relied on heterosexual marriage to secure the flow of property rights to men, obviously. And in white men's wills in the 17th and 18th centuries, you even see the lives of people who were enslaved listed as property, often next to other household items. So this is
Oh my God. Yeah.
the origins of sort of like what marriage was doing in America.
Right. Yeah, that is so appalling. When we talk about the very first American stories about marriage and divorce, we have to understand that context. We're talking about white marriage and divorce, right?
Right. Yeah. Definitely. Because people who were enslaved were not legally allowed to marry. And this was obviously a very intentional and active method for destroying Black kinship and dehumanizing the enslaved. Most white colonialists also came with English history. So many of them considered themselves English nationalists before the American Revolution. And while early Christians in England were actually a lot more liberal about divorce than you might expect, by like the 1500s, the Catholics did not permit divorce. And then you might remember that in 1534, Henry VIII literally just formed a new church, the Church of England, broke with Catholicism because he wanted a divorce. He wanted to get out of his marriage.
Nice. Yeah, so in some ways, these were like the pop culture stories of the time, the ones early American colonialists would have brought with them, the kinds of stories people circulated to understand how marriage and divorce could exist in their own lives.
They very much were. And you may remember that Henry VIII wanted to get rid of Catherine of Aragon, his wife then, because she wasn't producing a male heir, but also because he was lusting after another woman, Anne Boleyn, who was at one time his wife, Catherine's lady-in-waiting. And Anne's sister had also been his lover. So, I mean, this guy just wanted to sleep around. And so he created an entirely new church.
Right. Right. To be clear, the only reason I actually know any of that is from the Tudors, which is a very good and hot show. FYI.
Yeah, so Henry just wanted to sleep around. And also, for commoners, though, divorce in England increased over time from there. But it was still very rare, and it was actually for the wealthy elite. So there wasn't this separation of church and state that we would like to think that we have now. But you actually had to go through like this very complicated process to get a divorce. You had to get Parliament to grant you a divorce, but before that you had to get ecclesiastical approval, and you needed money, and you needed connections, and you had to prove that your wife betrayed you, because obviously these were men who were securing these divorces. And there was something then called divorce of bed and board, and there was like annulment. But the divorce of bed and board is like separation, so couples could live apart, but they could never remarry, which is wild.
Oh, wow. So they were just stuck for life, no matter what.
Yeah.
And I assume men were asking for these divorces. I assume women could not.
Right. Well, women, the burden of proof was much higher. So they had to prove not only adultery, but also bigamy or cruelty. So basically, no. So yes. And I saw this very funny TikTok the other day, and it's just this woman like in a very monotone voice saying like, sure, women didn't have divorce before, but they had poison. It's just,
oh God, that's so
all
dark.
these like, it's so dark. It really is. But her delivery is wonderful.
I love that. Yeah.
And she just goes through like all these, historical European examples of women getting out of bad or violent marriages with poison, or murder.
Right.
So this is like, what this is what the early Americans had to draw on. And Puritans actually, which is like the sort of English culture that moved over to early America, were more open to divorce. They actually saw it as a civil matter rather than a religious one, which is really contrary to how we think of divorce today. There was not as much social stigma as you would expect. And there was, often you'll see in these cases, these court cases, an expectation that you would support a spouse, even a former wife, after a divorce. It's also really important to note, though, that Indigenous peoples' marriage and divorce practices really varied. From culture to culture, but many had more communal or matrilineal views. But around the time of the Great Awakening, so we're talking like 1700s America, pre-American Revolution, that's when we see a few like really notable divorce cases start to shake things up in America. And we see an American divorce narrative really start to cohere.
Interesting.
It's also when divorce and property laws begin to cohere. And we could do very easily like an entire episode on just divorce law.
Yeah.
But for this conversation, I thought it would be more fun for us to focus on the culture.
Yeah.
Not just cultural attitudes, but like the cultural objects, texts. We're going to get to some movies that really have told the story of divorce over time.
What did the founding fathers think of divorce?
So, okay, there is one very famous divorce case, the Blair case, that Thomas Jefferson argued, in which he actually used some of the language that would go into the Declaration of Independence to justify divorce. And I feel
fascinating.
like many of us don't know this or don't think of this when we think of the founding fathers, right?
Yeah, that's a historical tidbit I definitely don't hear conservatives addressing as they advocate for rolling back no-fault divorce.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Jefferson was like a total sexist, but it was a huge shift in thinking historically, his arguing this case. He was arguing to change the law. He was claiming specifically that the separation of an abusive bond was an element of natural law and freedom. So he was sort of comparing divorce with, the colonies separating from the crown in England.
Interesting.
Right? So you have a founding father literally arguing that divorce is essential to the kind of freedom on which this country was built.
Wow.
And that divorce represents this fundamental human freedom. Anna Malika Tubbs, who has a fantastic new book out called Erased about American patriarchy, she has a kind of brilliant articulation of what was going on with Jefferson at the time, and some amazing examples that will blow you away in terms of Jefferson's patriarchal tendencies, like the way he talked about his daughters. And their sort of promiscuity and hygiene. But he definitely saw himself as superior to women. He believed, wives belonged at home, out of politics. And so he sort of revised, what could have been a kind of radical, sort of pro-woman stance after the Revolutionary War. And the Founding Fathers really perceived that women and the enslaved were a threat to this white male patriarchal order that they were building.
What about how divorce was coming up in literature at that time? I know in Victorian lit, you have the Bronte sisters writing about marriage as an oppressive institution, like in Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Marriage always corrupts love.
Right, totally. Yeah, well, in the U.S., by the late 19th century, we get novels like The Awakening. Are you an Awakening fan?
I've never read it.
Oh my gosh, Tracy.
Do you think I would like it? Would I enjoy?
I mean, if you like women drowning themselves in the sea to get out of their marriages, then... Oops, spoiler alert.
Oh, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Madame Bovary-esque, right? In the sense that it depicts a woman unaliving herself.
Okay. I mean, there is a time and place for those stories. I think I'll, bookmark that for later.
Specifically the late 19th century, because they couldn't get a divorce, right? Yeah. So you get more and more of these depictions of women who realize that marriage is oppressive and are creating, controversial literature out of that.
Right. So
notion.
These are not divorce plots per se, but they are women trying to escape their marriages the only way that they know how, because they knew divorce was not a possibility, or that the social and economic costs and stakes of ending a marriage were so high that they chose death. Right. Which, we're like laughing about, but like truly like that is a divorce plot at the time because of the inability to access it. Right. So it was not a good time. We also have like the Scarlet Letter, which is mid 19th century, which maybe you're more familiar with because she's branded as a whore. What are you trying to say?
It's like your beat.
Maybe you're more familiar with because she's branded as a whore.
There's more sex, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Well,
and because there was a filmic remake of it with Demi Moore,
and also that,
which is obviously how you know it.
I'm not helping my case by admitting that like I know the history that you mentioned earlier because of the Tudors and the hot sex scene. So, anyways, continue.
Right. I mean, the Scarlet Letter film with Demi Moore is like basically like pre-Tudors. Yeah, it's all connected. So for folks who don't remember the Scarlet Letter, she comes to Boston, and she thinks her husband has died. She falls in love with another guy and she gets pregnant, and then she finds out her husband's actually alive and he's like kind of a douchebag, but she can't get out of her marriage. And then the story is famously about like the wildly intrusive actions of the town to brand her as a whore for the rest of her life.
Yes.
Rather than just say, oh, you found a new love. Why don't you get a divorce and marry the father of your child?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. So lots of depictions of like that in the 19th century. We also had like Henry James wrote Portrait of a Lady, which is about a woman who's stuck in an abusive, unhappy marriage to a controlling man. And he also actually wrote What Maisie Knew, which is one of the first depictions of a child witnessing the contentious aftermath of adults separating, which is a divorce sort of subplot that we're going to come back to.
Yeah.
And then, of course, for our Edith Wharton fans out there, perhaps listening to this podcast, there was like The Custom of the Country, which is about a woman who actually goes through multiple husbands trying to like climb the social ladder. And Edith Wharton, I don't know if you know this, Tracy, but she had a famously sexless marriage. And then she divorced her husband and fled to Paris, which is probably my favorite divorce plot and one I'm trying to put into motion right now.
I love how we keep joking about your divorce plot, your divorce narrative. I feel like we've come up with some good storylines for you. Okay, so then in the 20th century, obviously with the evolution of Hollywood and film, we get this explosion of stories about divorce. But actually, can you tell me about when and how divorce started showing up in film?
Yes. So this was like fascinating to look into for the show. So in 1930, just as, film was kind of like moving out of like the talkie era, there was an adaptation of the book The Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott, which I also think you would love. She's a divorcee during the Jazz Age, and she engages in lots of casual sex. And it's about sex.
Yeah.
It's about sex.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, fair enough.
You're like, I feel like I'm being pigeonholed in a way that I don't like.
I mean, it's accurate. Let's be honest.
Yes. It's like Want Me, except it's a little bit like demoralizing casual sex.
Oh, interesting.
So it sort of depicted divorce as like a double-edged sword in terms of the freedom that it offered women in a society that was not really actually, allowing women to be free. But then, very interestingly, this thing called the Hays Code was adopted in Hollywood. These were guidelines created by a dude, surprising, not really, William H. Hays, to monitor and censor films in order to bind them to Christian values. So certain topics had to be excluded from films: criminal violence, suicide, birth control, abortion, race relations, homosexuality, and divorce. So during the time when the Hays Code was in place, there were films about divorce, but they were very sanitized and kind of reflected this growing taboo on divorce. So this is when we get films like 1937's The Awful Truth, which is about a couple trying to divorce each other. Then they realize the awful truth, which is that they love each other. So they stay together.
Wow. So this feels like the beginning of a whole new narrative, that humorous depiction of marital trouble that ends happily, almost as if spousal hatred is a sign of true love, which I feel like we still often see today, where it's deployed as a way to trivialize what could actually be more serious critiques or observations about heterosexuality and straight marriage.
Right. Like we talked about in the couples therapy episode, the kind of joyless understanding of marriage.
Yes, how it's normalized, and but also how there is this sort of like, this is what love is. Exactly.
And it's really emerging at that time, because if you compare that to like these 19th century narratives we're talking about, where women were like, it's so joyless, I need to
walk into
drown myself in the sea. Yes. Yeah. But here it's like, this is so funny.
Isn't it miserable?
Isn't it miserable? Yes. Yes. And The Awful Truth, as we're kind of pulling out, right, it also speaks to an emerging reconciliation plot, right? So there's the breakup and the get back together. And we're going to see that come back in style later.
Well, and that feels like such a kind of mirror of just like typical romantic, Hollywood films, where it's like the will they or won't they, and the difficult path to ultimately coming together, but it's just the divorce version of it all that is romanticized. Right.
And it's just a really easy like source of dramatic tension.
Yes.
But when that becomes, as we're going to see, like such a primary narrative about something like divorce, it has big cultural effects. So, we're talking about film, we're like moving into civil rights era and the sexual revolution, which had a huge influence on social attitudes toward divorce. There was a surge in no-fault divorce laws in the 60s and 70s. There was a divorce boom. By the end of the 70s, there's also an increased interest as a result in how is divorce affecting the stability of the nuclear family. So we get like some custody battle narratives in films like Kramer versus Kramer, which is a pretty like iconic, famous divorce film.
Interesting. And then we arrive in the 80s and 90s, and
yes,
I mean, those are the divorce plots that probably most of our, millennial listeners will find most memorable, and also for us as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these older films, like, I didn't even know about. But as we start talking about some of these 80s, 90s films, like, I'm so curious to know what your memories of them are.
Yeah.
Actually, do you remember your first exposure to stories about divorce?
I mean, I think my first exposure to stories about divorce would be in my real life, where so my parents were married, stayed married for 35 years. So my first exposure was really how my parents talked about my friends who had divorced parents. And I have to admit that the narrative that emerged for me, and I don't want to like blame my parents too much, like this is just at least how I kind of understood it within the context of the culture that I had grown up in,
Sure.
Was that I was so lucky to have parents who had stayed married and who liked each other. And so there was definitely that sort of storyline about the impacts of divorce on children that I, as a child, had an awareness of, and that sense of like gratitude of like, oh, thank goodness. And also the sense of like that it's rare to have parents, hetero parents who are happy and together and not divorcing.
In Berkeley, it was rare.
It felt rare, and because I think I had my parents would talk about like, unhappily married couples, right? So they weren't like, oh, people should stay together no matter what. I think they had a sense of just like, a lot of people are unhappy, and so it was not just divorce, but it was also just like unhappy unions that I think are very very common, right? So that was like, as a kid, that was my first exposure. But interestingly, like on the pop culture tip, the story that stands out to me most is My So-Called Life, when Angela Chase's dad has what is, I think, an implied affair. There's another woman. He clearly has a crush on her. And I also remember like funny details, like that the mom has like really short hair, but the like potential affair partner has like this long, flowy, feminine, like kind of
Was she younger?
I don't remember if she was younger, but I like, these are the things that like make early impressions on you as a kid and like convey so much about how the world works. But it's just like, she was like femme and like did her makeup and was like so well put together, the flowy long hair. And then the mom had a mom haircut, like the tight crop, and she was like less, feminine presenting in that way. And she starts to get suspicious about this relationship he's having with this other woman. And apparently the show's writers were planning on a divorce storyline for the second season, but it got canceled.
Which is like horrible. How could they do that to My So-Called Life?
Well, don't even get me started.
Yes.
But so that's where the storyline was going, and I definitely got that as a younger person. Like, that there was the implication of this marriage is on the rocks, their family is under threat. And so my first exposure to like a divorce narrative was definitely this like centered on the danger of men's desire, like their wandering eye, and the way that men's desire could be a threat to the security of the family unit. And so it's like interesting that I then went on to like devote so much of my life to reporting on men's desire. Feel free to psychoanalyze that.
And casual sex and the virgin whore dichotomy.
There it is.
I think we psychoanalyzed it.
My so-called life. It's pretty
exactly
pretty transparent. Yeah.
Culture has power, folks.
Yeah,
that's so interesting because I totally kind of forgot that about my so-called life. I mean, I think that was 94, and so I would have been like 9. So, and I remember watching it, but I don't remember that as well as some of these other examples that we're going to talk about. But what's so interesting about what you're saying is, you know, we both grew up in California. I grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles, but in Burbank, which is a little sort of like, you know, studio town, but it's very suburban. And my parents were divorced when I was in 2nd grade. And that's actually when we moved with my mom to Burbank. And I remember feeling like divorce was more rare, like that I was not normal in a sense. Like I never wanted my parents to get back together, but I remember feeling like most kids have married parents. And I'm sure a lot of them were miserable, as you said.
Yeah. Right.
But there was also like a large, like sort of Christian family contingent at my school. So I remember just feeling like we were a little bit, I don't know, off or subversive, maybe.
Interesting. That's so interesting.
Yeah. But when I was looking back at some of the culture from that era, I was actually really surprised to be reminded that it was kind of a good era for tough women divorcees, like in the 80s at least. We had Nora Ephron's Heartburn, which was a memoir, and then they turned it into kind of a hilarious film with, I think, Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson.
Oh, wow.
And it's also kind of like that tragicomedy of marriage tradition. And then there was, of course, War of the Roses, which I was young when that came out, but there's a reboot coming out this year, and is also like a sort of, you know, comedy about a couple separating. In the mid 80s, though, there was also the Babysitters Club that came out. Did you read the Babysitters Club? We've never talked about this.
A little bit, not so much. I was more of a Sweet Valley High girl.
Oh, we're doing a lot of psychoanalysis on you today.
I was more of an R.L. Stein kind of girl. I was,
Same. Sweet Valley High, not so much, but R.L. Stein.
Oh, I loved
Goosebumps.
That. I loved it.
Yes.
But the Babysitters Club, was there a divorce storyline in that?
There's a lot of divorce and blended families.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know this because of your kid's age, but it's very popular again now because they made the books into a graphic novel series.
That's right. Oh, yeah. No, my kid loves them. He loves the Babysitters graphic novel series, and also there's like the My Little Sister or something. There's like the
Babysitters Little Sister Club.
Yeah, he loves them.
Whatever.
He's totally into them. Yeah.
No, my kids love them too, and honestly, I feel like those stories have done more than any other cultural object so far for them to just normalize divorce, because it just shows parents who remarry and step parents, and you know, I forget who it is. Christy, Dawn, one of them has 2 houses.
That's interesting, actually, which shows that I haven't been reading these books with him, and he hasn't mentioned it to me.
It's like normal.
I think it is totally normal because we talk to him about all sorts of different families and different, styles of creating families, and
exactly.
So it's interesting that it hasn't come up. Like, he hasn't been like, Mom, why is this like this? It's like, no, it's normal.
Right. Yeah. Families look all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
So those originally came out, like I said, in the mid 80s. By the 90s, we see the divorce plot really explode. And a lot of those divorce stories, like you mentioned, kind of began with affairs. And often they followed female protagonists, usually women in their 40s in their divorce era, which of course we're seeing now in the culture again.
Yes.
But these women sort of post-divorce freedom, midlife awakenings really came with a condition, and that was that the women were always being left by the men. And probably the most notable example is the First Wives Club. That was like mid-90s. Diane Keaton, Bette Midler.
Yes.
And Goldie Hawn.
Yes. Hell yes. I have such a clear memory of that film. I couldn't tell you. Okay, I could tell you a couple things. I could tell you all those people are in the film that you just mentioned. I could tell you that I remember Sarah Jessica Parker being the hot younger woman who
she was.
Again, I was very tuned into the like threats to the family.
Yes, and she's very like dumb too in the film.
Yes, I remember that. But then the other thing is that scene where they start singing "You Don't Own Me." Yeah, it's like all three of them together, and it's a great scene, honestly. What I loved about it, I remember, is that it felt deeply aspirational and inspiring. I remember feeling that way when I first watched it. It's communicating this feeling of freedom and independence that definitely spoke to me as a younger person. And it wasn't that I was aspiring to divorce, but I was aspiring to that feeling. This post-divorce feeling that they were having of independence and freedom. Oh no, you've hit our paywall, which means you'll miss out on hearing about the stories we grew up with about divorce, from My So-Called Life to First Wives Club. You'll miss Amanda talking about getting to the other side of divorce myths. And you'll miss a weirdly hot and disturbing Ryan Gosling divorce scene. Unless you upgrade right now. Head to our Substack at direstraitspod.com. That's straits with a GH to upgrade. A paid subscription means you'll get a full episode every other week. You'll also get access to a virtual community, bonus content, and more. Plus, it's the best way to support this podcast. We can only do this work with your help. Thanks so much.